I'm an English professor at a community college, and I think one of the messages from the other side was certainly to be of service to others. I was a typical college student in many ways, a scholarship kid, came from a poor country town in Texas, and was really trying to rise up from poverty and abuse, and just like that materialism was a big part of my life. But I was also deeply depressed, when you enter the world with a lot of pain and abuse in your family and you don't quite know how to work it out, and then you're thrown into this, and it was the 90s, this big mix of excessive drinking and drug use. And of course I experimented, but I felt this deep loneliness beginning to overtake me, and I started to have panic attacks probably 3 months before I had the near-death experience, where I would think about this body and dying, and I would really freak out. I grew up, in a religious home. I just could not fathom the idea of not being my body and not having this consciousness. And I had this idea that I would get my life together, get healthy. I was a senior in college and I would run the Austin 10K. So as a way of getting rid of some of these panic attacks, I quit drinking so much and, quit the drugs. And I was like hardcore running every day. So this race was the symbol of, I'm going to get my life together. Everything's going to be great. On the way to that race, I had a massive head-on collision, massive. Basically, we kind of hit almost at a head-on. I broke my back. I had spinal injuries, couldn't feel my leg, waited 17 hours for spinal surgery. Luckily, the other person was in a big car and they were pretty much fine. They had to have plastic surgery on their forehead. I ended up connecting with a neurosurgeon who was off duty because one had not come back in. Like they were short staffed in Austin. There's a lot of college kids in that town who have a lot of accidents. And so what happened is I waited without painkillers, without anything, strapped to this board, not knowing if I was going to walk. Eventually she took me in for surgery. And the next thing I knew, I just stepped out of my body for quite some time, because I remember seeing the body and almost kind of laughing, like I felt so much joy because I knew the very moment I lifted up out of my body that we go on, that we do retain this consciousness. In fact, that consciousness even seemed clearer than when I was in my body. It seemed as if the body and the mind is a limiter of consciousness, and outside of body, there's a whole lot more consciousness and a whole lot more joy. The next thing I saw were these huge light beings, and they were massive. I didn't even have a concept of angels or Reiki or light work or any of this. Like, I was totally uninterested in spirituality. So to see these massively intelligent beings floored me. I mean, like, there they were behind the neurosurgeons, and I had so many thoughts all at one time. But one of the thoughts was, do the neurosurgeons realize that they're there? And why are they here? And immediately they sent waves of light and energy into my spirit form and kind of calmed me down. Like, I knew that they were there to help. And then they said, kind of playfully, and angels can be playful, they were like, watch this. And they sent this light through the back of the surgeons, through their hands, and it lit up my whole body. I just understood that they were guiding the surgeons, and even if the surgeons missed something, they were going to help. Like, they were literally there to assure me I'd walk, I'd run, and have a good life. So in that moment, I thought, okay, that's good to know. But then the monitor flatlined. Then I realized, oh, the body's dead now. I don't want to watch that. I'm going somewhere else. So I left the hospital room and I saw my stepdad. My mom had gotten married when I was in college. She'd remarried. I saw him, and then my soul really just started saying goodbye to everyone I had ever met. I just sent love in this sense of, hey, have a good life, have a wonderful life, enjoy it, because I was happy as that spirit form. That's the most shocking thing about death, is preferred it to life in a way. And a lot of people talk about that, but there was so much joy and freedom and safety. I knew that I was supported, in that realm, even though It took a while to get to that presence of God. It's so hard to explain, but I felt like there was a higher consciousness or a love that was sending light through the whole thing, through the angels. And as I left the hospital and went into the night sky, and as I went into that night sky, it's like I transitioned really quickly. A lot of near-death experiencers talk about a tunnel, but I went far out into the stars, kind of like the cosmos, and I was just hanging out there and just enjoying being in the stars. And this light came closer and closer and said just different things that were intense messages. One was love is all that matters and all that we take with us. Remind them to go to nature and be like a little child. And so the next place that I transitioned into was, I think, what people would call heaven, but to me, it felt like this beautiful holding space. It was, the grass was very green, the sky was very blue, the grass kind of swayed back and forth. There was nothing that was dead, everything was alive. So, how you look out in the winter different times, and maybe a piece of grass has a little brown on it. Each blade of grass like sung with the purity of what it was. It's like pure and alive. And I thought, oh, this is, just a beautiful place. I felt very peaceful, held in this light. But then my grandfather showed up, and he was the only person who was dead. And he was very loving, and I could trust him. And so I'm glad that he was there, because there was this sense of understanding. And we talked with telepathy, much like the angels sent that light. We didn't have to use our voices. Senses are very different. It was almost like he glowed with this light. He looked so young, about 35. At first I hardly recognized him. He was like his purest, most beautiful self. And yet it was the eyes and the jaw that I recognized as my grandfather. He showed me a truck that he had given our family. And this truck had rusted in our front yard, and nothing had happened to it. It had just been left to rot. And there in heaven, it was this beautiful truck. And he said, do you want to ride in it? And I had heard the message, be like a little child. And I saw that he had become 35. So I was 21 or 22 at the time of my near-death experience. So I was like, why don't I take the age that I knew him? And so I became this little child and got in the back of the truck, and he was just driving me through these beautiful pastures. And I felt happy and at peace, and, just like we're playing with consciousness, playing with form. But then he turned to me and he leaned out the window and he's like, do you want to go on? And he pointed to something that kind of looked like the sun, but immediately I knew this was God. And I was like, yes. And I just took off, because who would not want to see God, So as I'm flying towards this light and just getting more and more excited, I felt people's prayers, and I heard every word that they said. Like some people prayed because they didn't want my mom to lose a child. One of her aunts had lost a daughter, and she was like, don't let anyone go through this, don't let this happen. Other people prayed for me. My grandmother loved me and was praying for me. My dad and mom were also praying. I just kind of blew through their prayers, though, because I was like, God's up there. I don't care about you guys. As awful as that sounds, it was so much more exciting, to move towards God. And as I moved towards God, when you grow up with emotional and physical abuse, your self-esteem, it really takes a beating. And what I felt was like, one, I was safe in that presence of God. One, I was loved just as I am, and so is everyone. So are the parents who are neglectful or abusive. So are, every single person is worthy of God's love. And I felt how amazing it felt, but I also just felt changed. Like it was as if all the darkness, anything that had, quote, been done to me or was horrible, didn't exist anymore in that place. All that existed was love. And I'd never felt I could. I'd suffered from depression. There'd been, like a lot of questioning throughout my life. And in that presence of God, I did not want to return. I was like, no, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. And the minute I started thinking that about not returning, there was like this energetic wall that just came up, and I kind of hit it. And God was like, look down. And I say God, it's just this creator, divinity, whatever you want to call it, a light that was so incredibly loving and pure and not me. It was outside of me, it was a force greater than me. And when I looked down, I saw this river and many souls walking along it. And some souls were covered with darkness, and some were open and filled with light. And creator just said, hey, there are some people who live in fear, and this fear could be depression, it could be pain, it could be anything that causes them to look inward. Anger, it's just a block to me, basically, a block to God. Your mission is to go back and remind them to turn on their lights, to be open to that light of divinity, to let it flow into their life the way you're experiencing it with me right now. And I want you to teach. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. No, that's where we're gonna have an argument, God. I don't want to teach. I grew up poor. I'm definitely not going to go into that profession. No way. And it was clear that at that time it was not spiritual teacher, it was teacher in schools, like helping in that way. And it was almost as if God laughed at me, like my soul was kind of crumpled up like this ball and hurled back into my body. And then I was there in my body.